The anime started with loner boy Haruka, who hides near some goblins. The idiot blows his cover by stepping on the smallest twig, ever so the goblins chase after him. Haruka smiled with utter confidence as he jumps into the air and all the goblins fall into his trap. Haruka is very pleased with himself as he's doing a great job surviving alone in another world. A look back shows how Haruka got himself in this situation. Haruka has always been a loner, and he explains to us that it's because he just never wanted anything to do with his classmates. He didn't like any of them, and they would just get in the way of what he finds most important, and that's reading. As Haruka looked around his classroom, the divide among the students was very clear. There were the popular girls, the delinquents, the jocks, the class rep, the nerds, and the others category. Haruka didn't belong to any of these groups, but he wouldn't have it any other way. This was when a magic circle appeared out of nowhere. Haruka was excited because it was just like the ones he had read in manga, but he remembered that going to another world is a pain in the butts. The heroes in the manga always ended up having to be around a bunch of people, but that sounded like torture to Haruka. He tried his best to get out of the classroom, but it didn't go so well. All the other students panicked as the magic circle expanded, but Haruka cleverly escaped through an air vent. Unfortunately for him, the magic circle chased him up there, and he found himself in the generic white void place. How look exactly what to expect from reading so much manga. He wondered where the typical king was and when his daughter, who was beyond the reach of any nerd, would show up. Some old guy frantically signaled to him, so Haruka realized that this guy was some sort of god. It turns out that the teleporting was first come first served, so Haruka's classmates were teleported already and Haruka was left behind. Haruka was allowed to pick his status and skills just before being sent to his new world. A giant board appeared with all the options, but Haruka was disappointed about something. This was the first time the old god summoned so many people, so all of the cheat skills were already taken, and only the worthless ones were left. Haruka took a look at his options, but they were all terrible. One skill was just being able to hold a stick. Some other ones were just good overall general health and walking. Haruka made himself feel even worse by seeing some of the overpowered skills that he missed out on, like 4-element magic. Back to the bad stuff, Haruka found titles like Shut In and Neat. Haruka demanded for the old god to give him more options because he wouldn't even be able to pass the first village with the ones he had to choose from. The old god became fed up, so he decided to just give Haruka all the remaining skills at once. Haruka gained all the leftover worthless skills, and he was teleported. In the new world, Haruka is supplied with a bag that can hold unlimited items. Haruka gears up and checks his stats. His stats screen tells him to roll some dice, and he remembers reading about the skill. It allows him to allocate points by rolling dice. Haruka curses the old guy for giving him such a useless skill, and he rolls the dice. He rolls a double M, but Haruka has no clue what that means. He assumes the worst as he thinks that M stands for masochist. However, his stats screen just tells them to choose which stat he wants to add to. Haruka doesn't think that raw stats will help him survive with his terrible abilities, so he chooses to put the points into luck. His strategy is to completely ignore a balanced build, and instead he will just max out luck. Just then, Haruka realizes that the M stood for max because his luck stat is now maxed out. Haruka surprised when he notices that he has 2 extra skills and C of useless abilities. He assumes that it's because he was summoned alone. Haruki's loner title means that he's the loner with no friends and he cannot form a party. His servitude skill allows him to command others, and it was given to him because of his loner status. That's pretty cool, but it also means that Haruka has to say goodbye to his dreams of having a harem. Haruka wonders where all his classmates are, but it doesn't matter because he can't party with them anyway. Haruka decides to just begin his journey, and he wants to start by securing a base of operation. It's pretty hard to see through the forest, so Haruka is worried about a monster showing up. He wonders if he has a skill that could be useful, but the only one that comes to mind is the skill that allows him to doze off. Haruka tries on the contact lenses he has in his bag and finds that it's actually super useful. It allows him to see a bunch of extra stuff, and he finds that it grants him the appraisal skill. This leads to Haruka finding an edible mushroom that draws out latent abilities. His bottomless bag lets him take as many as he wants, so he apologizes to it for thinking it was useless earlier. Haruka chugs down some water, but he hears something in the distance. This sound leads him to a cave, and he prays that he doesn't find a monster. Haruka's bag came with a bunch of camping stuff, so he decides to make this cave his base. He uses temperature magic to light some twigs on fire, and determines that the leftover skills are actually pretty useful. Haruka checks his stats again and finds that his temperature magic leveled up, which unlocks fire magic. Haruka worries about what he will do if a monster appears because he can only smack it with the sticker right now, but he just ends up falling asleep. The next day, Haruka wakes to find everything is okay. He has items that repel monsters and his shut-in title protects his living space. Haruka can now use fire magic to start fires, so he cooked himself some breakfast. He had some beef jerky in his bag and he had some of the mushrooms he found the day before. The food is delicious. Haruka is very grateful for his villager starter bag. It's more than just a villager bag though, so Haruka thinks it's more like a bag for a survivalist. Haruka heads out to find more food for later, but he knows that the main concern right now is how to protect himself from monsters. Just then Haruka finds the last thing he wanted to see: two goblins. They are small fry monsters, but their stats are higher than expected. Haruka wonders if he can even win, but he realizes that it doesn't matter because you will have to learn to deal with monsters one way or another. Unfortunately, Haruka doesn't think that his stick will do much. Haruka does have a skill called wrapping, which allows him to wrap all sorts of things with magic and grants various effects. This seems to make his stick stronger, so Haruka is determined to surpass everyone even without any cheat skills. Haruka begins his first attack ever and he brutally beats down on the first unsuspecting goblin. The second one tries to attack him, but its moves are pretty lame and Haruka easily dodges them. Haruka somehow knows how to use a new power, and he eliminates the second goblin. Afterwards, Haruka is pleased after winning his first battle, and he heads back to base. He brought back one of the clubs that the goblin used, but he determined that his stick is still better. Haruka is excited to find that he leveled up and all his stats more than doubled. His cane mastery leveled up as well, which is strange because he just swung his stick around a few times. Haruka got magic confusion as well, which probably came from him enchanting his stick with magic. His calisthenics went up as well because Haruka has never missed a morning exercise. Haruka is exaggerating quite a bit though, as he has only been in this new world for 2 days. Later, Haruka is tired of eating mushrooms already. He would rather eat meat, but he knows that he would be schooled by the class rep for being ungrateful. With his meal done, Haruka decides to try out and enhancing himself. This magic infusion enhances his physical and magical defenses. Haruka's appraisal skill has also reached level 2, but he wonders why it's showing a bunch of question marks on all his stuff. Haruka decides not to overthink things and he leaves. He celebrates as the force blesses him with something already, but he realizes that it's just another mushroom. Haruka searches for meat that might grow out of trees, but he remembers that he's supposed to be practicing his magic. Haruka finds that his enhanced body is much lighter, so much so that it feels like he is teleporting. That isn't all, as his dexterity is insane now too. Haruka finds a more powerful goblin, but he easily defeats it. He takes out another, so he is confident that he could defeat even a group of 3 of them now. Haruka actually runs into a group of 3 goblins, but he's a coward, and he decides that he has had enough fighting for the day. Haruka recaps his day, which consisted of his goblin battle and magic studying at night. On day 5, Haruka succeeded in defeating a goblin with the single strike, and he decorated his base with some fancy stuff he made with magic. Haruka is once again pretty pleased as his life in this new world is starting to come together. That night, Haruka chases a meaty rabbit as he's desperate to eat some meat. Just then Haruka detects her presence and he instantly determines that it's not a goblin. It turns out to be his classmates, but Haruka is disappointed to see that it's the delinquents. Haruka would rather not get involved with them, but he senses that another group is in the other direction. His clairvoyance still allows him to see who it is, but he's horrified to see that it's the popular girls. The jocks are also rapidly approaching. The nerds are nearby too, but after talking to them from time to time in his old world, Haruka would rather take a pass on seeing them. That just leaves the class rep and her friends. Haruka knows that it would be best if he had some friends in this harsh world, and he has known the class rep since grade school. Haruka decides to at least say hello, but he stops himself. He realizes that he feels really free and isolated right now. He can live the way he wants without anyone butting in, and he wouldn't exchange that for anything. Haruka makes his final decision, which is to conquer this new world all alone. He then ducks into a bush to keep himself hidden as the delinquents approach, and one of them could have sworn he heard someone in this direction, and he's closing in on the bushes Haruka is hiding in, but as he checks inside all he finds is the bunny, so he and the others continue walking. Haruka is relieved. The delinquents then get up to head back to camp, and Haruka can tell that they are up to no good, but he can't bring himself to intervene because that would require social interaction and he's firmly against that. He heads back to his cave and starts grilling some mushrooms, but then he notices something that completely devastates him. His loner skill just leveled up, meaning even his status board recognizes him as a loner. This is probably because he chose to avoid his classmates, but still it's not the worst thing that could happen. If anything, he would like to level up more because his overall level is still only 3. The main reason for this is that he has 2 skills that he can't level is Jack of all trade and dummy skills. To be honest, he's not even sure what the skills do. Jack of all trades probably means he will be good at most things he tries, but he will never be able to become a master any particular craft, and that's pretty straightforward. But as for the dummy skill, the best explanation Haruka can come up with is something to do with puppets, but he's not sure about it. He decides to give up on trying to figure out for now and just eat his dinner, but he still really wishes he had some meat. Haruka calls it a day and goes to bed for the night, but as he's trying to get some sleep, he hears a huge ruckus outside and he can't just ignore it, so he gets up to figure out what's going on. As he left his cave, he was expecting to see the delinquents up to no good again, but to his surprise, it was actually the nerds this time. They are currently fighting a bunch of goblins and it looks like they are having a bit of trouble, so Haruka considers helping them out, but he changes his mind once he sees their stats. They've got skills that are way better than his and they are all level 16 while Haruka is still level 3. He figures they'll be alright without him, so he turns to walk away, but just before he leaves he spots 2 goblins sneaking up behind the group, and the nerds are already struggling as things are so if they get attacked from behind and they'll be wiped out sure. Haruka is still on the fence about whether he should help them or not, but then he remembers the time the nerds shared their holographic Charizard with him, and he then decides that they are worth saving. He runs out of the bushes with a stick in hand and he easily one-shot both goblins in one swing. He then turns to the nerds and asks them if they are alright, and the nerds fine, but they're shocked to see Haruka out here. Once they've gotten reacquainted, the nerds thank Haruka for his help, but he's having a hard time communicating with them since he hasn't spoken to real people for a long time now. He eventually takes them all back to his place and the nerds are all amazed by how nice the interior is considering as a cave. Haruka explains that he learned a little earth magic and crafting to help with the remodeling, but the nerds still think it's impressive that he did all this by himself. Haruka prepares a drink for them all and asks why they route in the middle of the woods so late at night. The nerd suddenly falls silent when the topic is brought up, and after a few seconds, they tell Haruka that they are actually on the run from the rest of the class right now. It all started after the class first got Ecchi here, and at first everyone was just surprised by everything that just happened, but they were soon faced with the reality that they are stuck here, and they started freaking out over it. A few of them were more calm about the situation, like the popular girls who seemed like they were more annoyed than scared, the jocks who were trying to figure out what to do but knew nothing about Ecchi, and the nerds who were totally within their element. The class rep was just as confused as everyone else, but she has the common sense to realize that crying in an unknown force is a good way to attract unwanted predators and get them all killed, so she tries to get everyone to quiet down. However, it was too late as a group of goblins had already found the class and the class rep has no idea how to handle these monsters, so she starts freaking out. Everyone else is freaking out as well, even the delinquents of the nerds know someone has to handle this, so they all activate their skills so they can take down the goblins. The gym bros join in to help, and soon enough all the goblins have been defeated, but it still isn't safe to be out here. So the class rep gets everyone's attention and says they should all find somewhere safe to stay before they get attacked again. A little while later, the class settled on setting up camp by the river, and the nerds took it upon themselves to teach everyone how to survive in this world with all the Ecchi knowledge they possessed. The duties were evenly divided among all the members of the class, and everything seemed like it was going well until the popular girls suddenly said, "Nah, we don't want to do any work." The class rep tried to convince them that the work was necessary and all they had to do was help set up the tents, but the girls just didn't want to bother with it, and since the popular girls weren't doing anything, the delinquents decided that they would be lazy as well, leaving the class rep and the nerds to do all the work instead. On top of that, the nerds went out of their way to handle all the monsters that would try to attack the camp, and while it seemed like a lot of work, they had to do this for their own sake. Back in the White Room, the nerds saw 2 particularly disturbing skills get chosen. One was the charm spell that grants control over people, and another troubling one was the puppeteer skill, which pretty much does the same thing. They knew that one of the delinquents possessed the puppeteer skill, so the nerds wanted to level up quickly in order to be able to defend themselves against the delinquents. However, at night the delinquents would go out and slay monsters as well, but only for the sake of leveling up so they can use their skills, and while the nerds eavesdropping on them, they began talking about how they will turn the girls into their slaves once they have enough levels to use their skills. The nerds realized that this would mean a lot of trouble, so they went to warn the class rep about it. However, just a few days later, the delinquents have leveled up enough to use their skills, and the class rep just so happened to be nearby, so they planned to make her their first victim. However, they ended up getting jumped by the nerds, and once they were down, their skills were sealed away so they wouldn't be able to cause any harm. Now the delinquents are basically powerless, and as you would expect, the girls didn't take it well when they found out about the plan the delinquents had made, so the delinquents were kicked out of the camp. that would have been the end of it, but the delinquents petty. So later that night, while the nerds were around and beat them up, the delinquents attacked the camp just to mess with everyone and ended up burning everything to the ground. Once there was nothing left, the delinquents retreated back into the forest, and by the time the nerds returned to camp, they were devastated to discover that all their hard work had been destroyed. The popular girls somehow blamed them for all the destruction and were giving them a really hard time for antagonizing the delinquents. The class rep stood up for them and reminded everyone that the nerds are the only reason they've been surviving out here so far, and the nerds appreciated the class rep having their backs, but they couldn't spend another minute and a camel full of such ungrateful people, which is why they all went on the run. After hearing the whole story, Haruka feels really bad for them, so he decides to host a feast of mushrooms for them that night. He actually enjoyed spending time with other people for once, but by the next day, the nerds had to leave because they plan on heading downstream to find a village and start their lives as adventurers. They offered to let Haruka join them because they consider him a friend, and while Haruka thinks of them as friends as well, he still has to decline their offer because he believes his trash skills would only hold the nerds back. With that said, he's also a bit worried about the situation of the class camp, mostly because the class rep is still there and she's the only other person in the class that he likes, so he decides to go check it out. Along the way, he randomly runs into a cobalt and the thing bites him a lot, but ultimately, he manages to kill it and continue his journey. By nighttime, he arrived at the riverside where the class camp should have been, but surprisingly the place is totally deserted. He assumes they must have moved somewhere else, so he uses one of his detection skills to pick up some footprints and follows them until he eventually comes across the popular girls. Of everyone in the class, Haruka hates dealing with them the most. She tries to turn around and head home, but the girls have already started chasing him. Haruka would have no trouble outrunning them, but he stopped dead in his tracks when he hears them say the word please. In all the years Haruka has known them, please has never been in their vocabulary, so something serious must have happened for them to be this desperate. He decides to talk to them after all, and the first thing that girls do is ask him if he knows where the nerds went. Haruka is hesitant to tell them because he thinks they just want to yell at the nerds some more, but on the contrary, the girls actually want to apologize to them. They now realize how much the nerds were doing for them, and they sincerely want to make amends for the way they treated them. But by now the nerds are alone gone, so there's no way the girls would ever catch up to them. To begin with, they can't make it out of the woods by themselves, and they can't defend themselves from monsters, so how do they intend to find the nerds? He asked them if they have the resolve to do whatever it takes to go apologize to the nerds, but the girls break down crying because they know that they'll die in no time if they are left out in the woods by themselves. They plead with Haruka to teach them how to survive out here. He is so stunned by their sudden request that he ends up agreeing to it without thinking. As a result, Haruka's subjugate ability activates, and all of a sudden the girls have become his subservient followers. Now all they do is blankly stare at him and finish off monsters whenever Haruka gets into a fight, and then they pull out the magic crystal and present it to him like puppies looking for praise. Haruka really isn't happy with how things are going, but for now he notices that one of the girls has a small injury on her arm, so he hands her a healing potion he made so she can recover. However, she just uses it on him instead. He's getting really sick of how the girls only do things for his benefit now, and he is really worried about how he's going to explain this to the class rep if he runs into her, and right on cue, the class rep just so happened to be walking through that part of the woods at the moment. And with that, we have come to the end of this part. Stay tuned for next part. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell to receive all the latest updates.